Hello Internet, my name's Rich, this is me, my bike and I. Today I'm going to carry on pulling apart the 1984 Honda VF750F engine that I've got on my bench sat over there. Let's get to it. So I need to spin this bolt off anti-clockwise clearly because the bolt comes off anti-clockwise, and what I can't do in this instance is put a copper wedge in there like I did when I was undoing the cams at the top, because this time when I turn the alternator bolt that way, because we've switched it round, of course this is going to turn that way and that isn't going to wedge, it's just going to come out. I'm going to assume I need a breaker bar. Reckoning this probably requires about maybe 80 to 90 newton meters of torque, something in that order. I'd imagine it's pretty tight on there. As always, can't get a grip on it. Right, let's not mess around. Right, try not to get my own light here. I've got a couple of options. Firstly, I can use those threads on the rotor there, which I think is a left-handed thread, probably 1.5 to 2 mil pitch. Looks about 2 mil, and wind in must be a 22 mil diameter, something like that, bolt to push against the rotor, and that should just pop the stator off the taper, or just put a regular puller in to push against the stator and use these two little points here to pull against. So I don't have a suitably sized left-handed threaded bolt with the right pitch, etc. So I think I should try the regular puller first, see if that works. If not, I will have to purchase one to get in there and use those threads once I've figured out exactly what they are. Sorry about the light. Yeah, reasonably confident that's 1.5 mil. Try the next size up, 1 3/4. It's unlikely. No, it's 1.5 mil. Now these two are for bearings and things, that's kind of it, but then I don't have any hooks on here. Okay, I think my options are then adapt this one, or bite the bullet and go and get that special size bolt. What I might do is try a slide hammer first. If it doesn't work, I will just go and get the bolt that I need to push against the, well, I say push against the stator, what I mean is push against the end of the crank shaft actually. So pop one in the other side. Right, well, you've got to try these things, haven't you? Anyway, let's get the correct tool in there and see if we can pull it out properly. Well, clearly my cobbled together puller attachment was never up to the job. I think the bond on that taper is just too great and I need the correct tool. So I will bite the bullet and go and buy the correct threaded insert for that. I think it's 22mm, 1.5mm pitch I measured, and left-hand thread, so you've got to get a bit of a specialist left-handed bolt really, that's all it is. When you do this, what you will find is that you'll need a breaker bar and you will feel like you're over-torquing it and it will feel like it's never going to break away, but it will eventually pop off and probably scare the bejesus out of you. Anyway, I shall go and purchase the correct part and I will be back with you in a few seconds. In reality, it will be a few days. It is the next day now and what I have is not a purchased tool. I went through my bin of bits and I found this. It's got a 22mm hex head on it, which I don't have a socket for, and I'm assuming it's just been cut out of one piece of hex stock and threaded, and it might be smaller than 22mm. Either way, it is a right-handed thread. Now, I was convinced this was a left-handed thread, but further inspection, I think not. I was also convinced that it was a 1.5mm thread pitch. That does seem to fit. It is an internal thread, that can be tricky, and 1.75 it just doesn't seem to like. This, on the other hand, is definitely a 1.75mm pitch, absolutely no shadow of a doubt. And it screws in perfectly and bottoms out on the end of the crank as it should. Now, can I be absolutely sure that is bottoming out and not just binding up? Well, the threads are very smooth all the way and then it suddenly stops. Little test I can do, bit of plastic gauge, pop that in there, hook it behind, tighten it down. Yeah, and that snip the edge off. There's not enough on there, unfortunately, to give you a good long flat piece. But if you can see that, it's definitely made contact and squished it down, so that's definitely bottoming out. So the question is, do I just use this because it is the right thread and it goes in? But of course, this could be a lot softer than the correct tool, and it might chew the threads up and it might damage the internal thread on the rotor. And well, I can only get a 22mm spanner on it because I don't have a socket of the right size, and then getting good purchase on it to turn it is going to be harder. I think I'll just turn the engine. Let's do the right thing, get the correct tool. I might even need to get an impact on it. Alright, a few days later we've got the correct tool, and it is in fact an M22 by 1.5, so it is a 1.5mm thread. Yeah, I can't quite fathom why that one that is definitely a 1 3/4 thread threads in okay, but this is the right tool, so I'm glad I didn't persevere with that. I could have done some damage. So we shall get I think we'll get a breaker bar on this, and we'll pop this thing off. Sadly, about a year and a half ago, one of my uncles passed away, and he was a little bit like me. He was a bit of a home gamer, DIY hobby, spanner monkey, a biker, and he had an absolute shed load of tools that, since he passed, have just been sat down the bottom of his garden in his little workshop, not getting used. And my aunt very kindly donated them to me the other day, and I've been slowly bringing them across. There was one tiny little thing that I immediately saw that I would get some benefit from, because whilst I've got a vast collection of tooling, there are just 1 or 2 little bits that ridiculously I don't have, and now I do. So there's some really big things like post drills and bench grinders and all sorts of stuff like that that I've got, but mine is just rubbish and worn out, and these are actually far superior and not worn out. And just one of the many kits of things that he's got, I laid my hands on immediately. Sockets. Now I've got loads of sockets, you know, long reach, slim, stubby, 3/8, 1/2 inch, all kinds. And do you know what I don't have? I don't have any hex sockets whatsoever, of this size anyway, with 1/2 inch drives. In fact, I've got very few hex sockets, all sort of multi-point. This is a 22mm, exactly what I need for that puller bolt. Didn't have one up until a few days ago. So my impact sockets only go up to 21mm, they're 1/2 inch drive, they are hex. All my other regular sockets are 3/8, and you risk breaking your ratchet head off in those on something that's really tight, and they only got to 21mm, and then they sort of jump up to 27 and 30 for larger applications. So this is ideal for 3 reasons. Firstly, it's the right size. Secondly, it's a hex socket, and if it was a multi-point, there's a risk it could round off, particularly on a very hard bolt like that. And thirdly, what it means is I can stick my 1/2 inch breaker bar straight in. Anyway, I need to stop the engine rotating while I bear down on it, so I'm going to do that with my wire and copper washer. Just going to spin the engine round and I'll show you where I'm going to jam it. And as a reminder, because the heads are off, there are no valves, nothing's going to interfere. Doesn't matter which way you turn the engine. And I do need to turn the engine clockwise because I'm going to be bearing down on this clockwise, which means the other end of the crank is going to be turning anti-clockwise. So this drive gear here that turns this driven gear here is going to be causing it to do that. So this washer, which is copper, and you use copper to ensure that this gets damaged and these gears don't because it's softer. Just feed it in. There you go, it just needs to sit there. Gravity do the rest. Hopefully that's a close-up enough so you can see where it is. You can see the drive gear on the end of the crank to your right. What's in front of it towards the camera is the second idler gear, which is on the back of the starter clutch, and that big gear there on the left is the driven gear behind the clutch. So these things will bear down on each other, squashing that washer as we put pressure on that bolt the other side. The tricky part is going to be holding this engine as I put pressure on it, because it will take an awful lot. I probably should have cobbled together some sort of engine stand really that just holds it perfectly still. But let's see what we can do. Didn't take any effort, did it? This is all fine inside, it's just a rotor. I can't imagine these are going to be any more than about 8 Newton meters or something like that. 10, 12 probably. Should just slip off. Yeah, I just need to release the clamp there for the 3-phase wiring. Now the only thing holding it in is just this grommet. That should pry out okay. And I'm just going to take the opportunity to take this little wood rough key out if I can get behind it. Doesn't want to come out. That literally just stops the stator from rotating on it. I could just leave it there while it's minding its own business. The problem with that is it could just fall out on its own accord next time, another time, and okay, I'll come back to that. The thing about this engine is it is looking worryingly clean, and by worryingly clean I mean, has somebody been in here recently? Look at all that paint, and it is paint, it's not gasket sealant, but has somebody been in here previously to try and resolve an issue and not resolved it. Okay, let's remove the clutch. Stick your gloves back on it. Oh, that's come out already, good. So you just need to get all these bits and pieces off. We'll start with the starter clutch. So you've got the pulsar coil hangers right here. This is the rear and this is the front of the engine. So this is the rear pulsar coil effectively, and that's the front pulsar coil. So the engine at this point is rotating clockwise from this side. Of course, normally when you say the engine turns anti-clockwise, it depends on which side you're looking at it, doesn't it? And normally you'd say that from the left side of the engine over on the other side by the stator, because that's where you'd stick a spanner on it and turn it. But you are looking at it now from the right hand side, obviously the clutch side, and it turns clockwise. So essentially when this little lump here passes by this coil, what it does, it sends a spark to both rear cylinders, and then 90 degrees later it sends a spark to both front cylinders, obviously through the TCI and the coil and so on, because this essentially is just a signal at this stage. So what you'll find is that the rear and the front are 90 degrees out of phase. Now what you'll notice is that the rear cylinders go up and down in exactly the same phase, in step with each other. As you can see, they're in the same position. If I turn the engine a little, I could make it more obvious, because I could bring two of them to the very top. But you haven't got one at the top and one at the bottom. And what's going on is, as this goes past the rear pulsar coil and it sends a spark to both of the rear cylinders, they're coming up on top dead centre. One of them is coming up on its compression stroke, and about 10 degrees before top dead centre the spark fires and it ignites the mixture, and then you get your power stroke on, let's say, the number 1 cylinder to start with. Well, what happens on the number 3 cylinder, because that's coming up on top dead centre but it's on its exhaust stroke? Well, it still sparks, but it just doesn't do anything. It's a wasted spark. It's what you call a redundant spark. 90 degrees later, the 2 front cylinders are then at top dead centre. If it's number 1 that's previously fired, then the number 4 is coming up at top dead centre on its compression, and number 2 then is going to be on its exhaust stroke, and the spark will ignite the fuel mixture on the number 4, and then you'll get your power stroke, and then you'll get your redundant spark on the other side. And so the cycle continues. 270 degrees later, the rear will start again, but at this point the number 3 cylinder will be at top dead centre on its compression, and then exhaust on the number 1. You'll get your power stroke, that will be wasted, then that will go to intake, and so the cycle continues. So you get a fairly even firing where you'll get bang bang quite quickly, then 270 degrees round, bang bang quite quickly, then 270 degrees round, bang bang quite quickly. So it's going from rear to the front, and it's going from the left to the right. So it's going 1 4 3 2, 1 4 3 2. So that makes for quite a smooth firing order. So what we've got here then is the starter clutch mechanism. If you know how a starter clutch works, then this is just old news. So down here, first idle gear, and you can see it will spin freely that way. I'm actually turning it in the opposite direction because the second idle gear up here is now rotating anti-clockwise, and of course from this side of the engine would normally rotate clockwise. So the whole point of this, the way it works, is you can turn the first idle gear freely that way, but if you try and turn it the other way, well, you can, but you're overcoming the resistance of the engine and turning the engine. And that's because this is a one-way clutch. This second idle gear can spin that way freely, but not that way freely. What's the point of that? Well, very, very simple really. When we do crank the engine over, because the starter motor comes through here, it's in constant mesh with the first idle gear, it will turn the first idle gear that way. That will go through the reduction gear and onto the second idle gear, which will essentially if you can see, you can push there, and now I'm trying to overcome the force of the engine. That will essentially crank the engine over in this direction. The engine will then fire up and it will be operating under its own power. But you can see the second idler gear here, that can go that direction because it's a one-way clutch, which means that when this is turning under its own power on the end of the crank, it cannot drag the second idler gear along with it. So why do we do that? Why is it set up in that way? Well, what it means is that when the engine is just running and the second idler gear here, as you can see, cannot get pulled along with it, it will just sit still. Now if that gear is still, the first idler gear there is going to be still. And you've got to bear in mind, on a motorbike, the starter motor is in constant mesh with the first idler gear. And what you don't want when this engine cranks over and is running under its own power, you don't want through the gears, you don't want the starter motor to be continuously spinning over. On a car, of course, the bendix at the end flies out and engages with the flywheel of the car. On a motorcycle, particularly on a smaller engine motorbike, not some of the bigger ones that are more like car engines, but on a smaller one, the bendix on the end is in constant mesh with what we call the first idler gear. So it is important that you have a one-way clutch, so that when that engine, the starter motor will be turning the engine over this way, but once that engine fires and takes over the operation, then what we want is for the second idler gear to be let go of, which is why you can see it can spin that way freely, which means that if the starter clutch is turning that way on the end of the crank, it can't drag. So I could hold on to that and that could be turning and this wouldn't move essentially. And if that doesn't move, this doesn't move, and the starter motor doesn't rotate. I'm sure if it did, it would burn out in no time. Just behind there, you've got this big old gear on the end of the crank, in between the second idler gear and the block. And so that's going to be turning clockwise as we're looking at it. And in turn, that will turn this driven gear anti-clockwise. Now that is attached to the rear of the outer clutch basket. The outer clutch basket is in constant mesh with the friction plates, part of the clutch plates. Under spring pressure, they are compressing on the steel plates. You can just see them down there, sandwiched in between. The steel plates are in constant mesh with their own teeth on the sort of inner side, on the inner clutch basket. The inner clutch basket is attached to the input shaft of the transmission, and the input shaft is in constant mesh with the output shaft of the transmission. So as your crankshaft is rotating clockwise, of course, that's going to cause your outer clutch basket here to rotate anti-clockwise, and that's going to directly translate through the inner clutch basket to the input shaft, so to rotate that in an anti-clockwise fashion. And the input shaft is in constant mesh with the output shaft down here in this line of sight somewhere. So if this is rotating in an anti-clockwise fashion, the output shaft that it's in constant mesh with is going to be rotating clockwise there. And if you go through round to the other side, that clockwise motion from this side is going to be an anti-clockwise motion on the end of the output shaft, which is going to directly pull your front drive sprocket round in a clockwise motion to pull your chain round and turn your wheel in the direction you want to go. I've no idea if that made any sense. I understood it. Anyway, let's get the starter clutch off. Right, let's get these hangers off first actually. You can't mix these up actually because they're just they're different sizes. The distance between the bolt heads on here is shorter than on these two, so Makes it easy to take things off without having to over-label things. These washers get destroyed really quickly, so you do have to keep changing them. $17mm on this end, let's see how tight it is. Pretty tight. Not sure if that moved. Don't think it did. Breaker bar. This is the hard bit, trying to stop it from... It's not that you can't, it's not that it's too tight, it's just that you can't get the leverage because the engine's just trying to lift off the bench. You have to pick your positions wisely. Or just pick your tools. That ain't moving. Right, I think having a single copper washer in there is probably not enough. So let me see if I can pop a couple or a few more in. It's not enough room between the teeth actually, but let's see if that does it. Use an actual impact socket. Actually, put a slightly different one on. Hopefully, this will do the job. Without coming flying off. Make sure they are copper, by the way, before you go doing this, not just copper plated steel. Test them on a magnet. Completely sacrificial, of course, just need to back those out now. It should just slip off. So this has got a variety of different names, very often called a sprag clutch, a one-way clutch. It's most commonly called the starter clutch, simply because it is part of the starter gear mechanism, if you like. And you can see I'm rotating it clockwise because from the right hand side of the engine, of course, it does rotate clockwise. We call it an anti-clockwise engine because we're only describing it from the side that you would normally turn it over with a spanner, because you have to really turn the engine in its normal direction of travel. What you can say is that this engine rolls or runs forwards. Some engines roll or run backwards, but this one's designed to run forwards, and it's all to do with the cam chain tensioners, really, so that you're not taking the pistons and valves temporarily out of whack. Anyway, another topic. But you can see how this works. I'm turning it in the normal direction of travel, and I'm holding on to the second idler gear, and the second idler gear is stationary in my hand. If I tried to turn it the other way, it would turn the gear. So it's one way in its makeup. And what that means, as we said, is that if this gear is stationary, the first idler gear is stationary, and therefore the starter motor is stationary, and you're not going to be dragging the starter motor along with the engine when the engine's running, because the starter motor is a very short-term use, sort of single burst, sort of little piece of machinery, and if it was to continue to run with the engine, it would just burn out. It's not got an oil feed, it's just got a bit of little grease in it. It's designed to be used for a few seconds, and then it just stays stationary and stays cold during the running of the engine. So that probably describes the operation of the one-way clutch a little bit better than when it's on the actual engine block itself. What we can do is take this apart as part of the engine rebuild and show you how the actual one-way clutch works itself. It's very clever. It's just kind of got some people describe them as cams. They're not really cams, they are just tiny little cylinders of metal inside that get forced sort of towards one end or the other of a sort of a tapered slot, if you like. Very simple in design, but very effective. Yeah, big old washer on there. Keep that safe. I don't think there's any no clips holding that on. That's fine. They're all splines, so none of them have got keys or anything like that. Right, let's get to work on the clutch. I am just going to take the push rod out firstly, and then we can start work. Now, I was concerned it might be like the push rod is like two halves really. You've got like a very short push rod on this end inside. It's not called a push rod, it's lifter guide, I think it's called. Sometimes they've got ball bearings. Wrong one, I need the other. That's it. So yeah, sometimes they've got like a little ball bearing in between, and I've looked at the schematics and they don't. That's a bit of a pain. Just trying to get the pin to fit in the tiny little hole, but I think that's slightly obscured. There you go, you've got it. Okay, let's get that out. Yeah, so yeah, no, I don't think there's a ball bearing in there. Right, do get yourself a really good set of circlip lights, by the way, because eBay is awash with the cheapo Chinesey brands, and they are just awful. They're so flimsy, but these are solid. You've got, you haven't got interchangeable heads on them. They're just cast as one piece. So you've got the sort of two straight internal and external. You've got the two hooked internal and external, and they're really very good. These are US Pro. I've got quite a bit of US Pro equipment, and it's always served me really well. So yeah, highly recommend these. Okay, this is the clutch lifter plate assembly. I think it just slips off. Just needs teasing. There you go. I think that bearing in there is captive, so it shouldn't go flying out or anything. A tiny bit fiddly. There you go. Just slip off there. Ah, there you go. That's that little lifter that I was referencing. So the push rod that I just took out goes directly in there. And that's why I thought there may be a ball bearing, but there's not. I was literally just looking at this to try and figure out what stops this lifter rod from going all the way through this bearing, because this is just a standard bearing at the end of the day. It's got no shoulder in it. You'd think that there would be a shoulder on the lifter rod, wouldn't you? But there isn't. But what you can feel with this pick is that there is and I now can see it on the drawings, is that there is just a very tiny little circlip in there, a tiny little sliver of metal taking all of the pressure when the push rod is pushing in there and pushing your lifter plate away under spring pressure to operate or disengage your clutch. It's that tiny little circlip in there that is taking all that strain, which is a bit crazy. But then this is a 1984 bike. I guess the engine and the design is back to the 70s anyway, so it's a very, very odd little thing indeed. What I really love is this nut on the end of the input shaft holding the clutch on. It's really thin, probably no more than about 8mm across, shouldered, and I just love that design. Now the issue I've got is I don't have an impact socket of the right size. All I've got is one deep socket that's 27mm, but it's pretty much a standard socket rather than an impact. But it's the only one that I've got that will go on there. Feels a bit loose, but then it is a multi-point. I can't imagine a 26mm will go on there, and I don't have one anyway, so I'm going to use this on the impact and see if we can get that off. Rookie error, should have loosened this before I took the other gears off, although I could just slip that primary drive gear, I think it's called, back on. Maybe we should, having said that, this is going to be turning anti-clockwise, which means I can't go wedging anything at the top. I'd have to wedge it underneath. Let's hold on to it and see what happens. Nothing happened there. There's a bit of grot in there actually, so right, anyway, let's give that another go. No, that's chewing that up. I think what's happening is that it's a good fit, but as soon as it kind of comes away a little bit, it's sort of spinning round, and then it's chewing the corners off. So let me see if I can hold it on there. Otherwise I'll have to think up another plan, won't I? No, that's not working. Right, let's slip that back on. I think we'll wedge into there. Right, hopefully that'll do it. Yeah, my bad, that was not shouldered at all, but you can see, I think that's been chewed up a few times to be fair, from being taken on and off. But you could see some little flakes of metal coming off as I was doing it, so not too happy with that, but we are stripping it down, so I will obviously give this a good polish up before it goes back on. Deburr, that kind of thing. That must have just been a good old chunky washer behind that. Oh yeah, look. Okay, that's what I mistook for a shoulder. Does that come out? Yep. Just get that out if we can. Yep. Take that primary drive gear back off. Should be that next. Oops, hang on. I'll take all those clutch plates out. Just want to get the pressure plate off. There you go. Right, let's get all this lot out. So I'm going to try and take it out as a pack. And there we go. The centre's come out with that actually. Okay. This actual clutch centre part here is really fiddly. It's actually 3 parts. You've got another one-way clutch just there, and then an inner piece. So it's like 1, 2, 3 separate pieces. They do just, you could lift this up and they just drop apart, but you've kind of got to twist it, turn it at the same time to push them all back together again, because these are all like little rollers that are in there. So it's a little bit like your starter clutch in a sense. They make these things so complicated, don't they? Right, that should just slip straight off there now. Oh, crikey. Now you've got a needle roller bearing just in the centre of that. Careful not to damage or lose any of that. I'm wondering if I could have just taken that all off as one big assembly. Probably could have, couldn't I? As if by magic, it's all back together. I'll just put a zip tie through it to keep it all in order, basically. The only thing I can't slip back on is that, because obviously that's blocked off, so I won't be able to put a zip tie all the way through. Unless I just took that out, actually. That might be a better idea. Pop that on there. Just leave those loose. Right, what I want to remove next is the counter shaft bearing cover. Right there, I think I've taken all the bolts out already. Yeah, so it probably just needs a bit of a tappy tap tap. So much crap in there. Oh my days, look at that, there's a hidden bolt. That bolt right there, yes there is a bolt there, seems to be buried behind whatever this piece of metal is, so unless that isn't part of this cover, unless that's not holding it on. I thought I'd got all the bolts. I was sure I'd removed all of the case bolts from here. How are we supposed to get behind there? I do not know. Maybe I've got to take this water pump off first. Possible. So, aside from this bolt here that's being fouled by that little feature there, which is attached to this water pump, here we've also got a bolt there that's got to come out, so that water pump's definitely got to come off. Right, I need an 8mm on there. Same old with the old paint. Mess around with paint stripper or anything like that. I'm just going to force it on. That was loose. Right. Still too tight to turn. Well, hang on a minute, I turned that a minute ago. Which one was I trying to loosen? That one. Okay. Spooky, and seem to have 2 attempts at loosening it. Let that run for a bit. Don't have a suitable container to catch that in, unfortunately. Okay, in for a penny, in for a pound. Might as well just take it off. Short one there. Seems to have stopped. Hopefully that's it. Yeah, you can see that coming away now, so that's going to get me access to that little bolt. Pry this off. No mating surface here, so a bit of harmless manoeuvrance. Well, there was there, but anyway, harmless. Okay, that don't look too bad. Sounds a bit ropey. Might just be a bearing behind there needs changing. Anyway, it's freely moving, so that's not too bad at all. Just take this hose off. It's got to come off anyway. I feel like I'm butterflying from one thing to the next, but sometimes you just need to treat things like a bit of a interlocking puzzle, don't you? So this shouldn't be tight. Famous last words. Oh, you ain't happy. Really stiff threads on that. Let's do the other one. Oh, damn it. Managed to chew the paint off, that was about it. There you go. Not surprising these are a little stiff because they've got a higher propensity to have a little bit of water ingress down into the bolt holes. As you can see, actually you've got, if you can see on there, white oxide and red oxide, so typical sort of aluminium oxide build-up coupled with a bit of standard red rust. That's why they're behaving a little differently to a lot of the internal fixings. That should, in theory, just lift off, but of course, probably won't. There we go. I'm excited then, I thought I can break out that puller I made for the other 2 water rails. other ones in the actual pipe itself, so probably just leave that there for safekeeping for the minute. Ah, there's a little bracket down there that needs undoing as well. Yeah, this is just standard O-ring grabbing your part. Ah, well, and it suddenly comes out. Great, fabulous. So that's the other end of the rod that comes through from the drive gear on the clutch side, so you can see the little blade on there. It just slots into there and drives your water pump. So that O-ring is just sort of keeping rot from outside of the engine from getting in. The O-ring that will stop water and oil exchanging will be in there. It's not a serviceable part, unfortunately, but I think we're okay with this one. Looks a little cruddy, but that will clean up. Should come through okay. Yeah, satisfying click. And then just this one over here. Let's see if this just pulls off. I doubt it, but we'll see. Because of sitting on this spline, I'd imagine that's going to cause a bit of a problem. Sometimes it's just being able to get a hold of something, which can be difficult unless it's loose. Right, let's get a swader. Freed up, so imagine that's just going to shift now. There we go. That's looking pretty grotty. Careful of the dowel. This is the inside. Now you can start to see some of the milky oil, so that's where moisture is contaminating the oil. Just don't really know at this stage where it's getting in. Clearly no gasket leaks there around that mating surface, so not there. This of course is just the seal for the output shaft, so no water around this area. So what we're seeing is just what's pouring out of the engine. Look at it, horrible, isn't it? But if it was getting in anywhere, it would have been through there, through the water pump, but I suspect head gasket. Could be anywhere though. But that's where your shifter goes through. So you can imagine this is facing forward. That's open to the elements. Water could be coming in there and straight over that mating surface and into there. Who knows? I suspect this is just residual from elsewhere inside the engine, so we'll sort it. While we've got this out, I'll just show you that tiny little gallery there, which I can't even shine a light through, is the entire feed that comes out up through there and goes to those two pipes that split off in the V of the engine to feed the very top of the engine. So it's fed through that channel there, enters through there from the well, basically the top of the transmission. Once it's finished doing its job there, splits off there to the little bearing there as well, or the bearing there anyway. And I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong, I think that in there is your oil pump. So that shaft is coming through and driving the oil pump and continuing on and out through bushings and seals to drive your water pump. Because this is typically your oil pump drive chain. It's very slack. It doesn't matter, there's no timing element, you don't have a tension, anything like this, but when you listen to it, it's all of that kind of noise that contributes to the overall rattle of the engine, if you like, when you can hear things rattling around and you think, is that a cam chain? It's actually quite possible that it's this oil pump drive chain that's making a bit of noise. And you can change it, you don't need to tension it, and of course, like I said, there's no timing element to it, so it really doesn't matter as long as it doesn't jump off the sprocket. You're good. Now, engine's in neutral at the moment. This is the end of your shift drum. So each one of these 5 recessions here will represent which gear you're in, and you can see it's in neutral because I can hold the output shaft the other side and turn the input shaft, and you can see it's not turning there. If I let go, it will turn it a little bit, but that's only because, you know, freewheeling gears still stick with a bit of dirty oil and what have you. Nevertheless, it's in neutral, otherwise you wouldn't be able to turn it at all. You're holding on to both, that is. Which means that where that little wheel is sat there is the neutral position. So this is going to be first, second, third, fourth, fifth. What's really unusual is that normally where that sits in neutral is you get a tiny little divot so that it does kind of lock in and just hold it there. Otherwise it is quite sort of free and easy to slip into first or second. I guess that's because it's a much older engine design. Certainly on a lot of later engines you see a tiny little divot where that would sit, but it's sitting in this recess here, which holds you in gear, which stops everything from just jumping from first to second. Well, that's it for this video, and next time we'll carry on taking off the rest of the externals before we start pulling the cases apart. Still don't really have a very definite idea as to why moisture is contaminating the oil. It could just be getting in through a variety of different places across head gaskets and oil seals and things like that. Who knows? And hopefully just putting it back together all fresh and renewed will sort it out. It could still be just contamination through condensation building up inside the crankcase. The bike has been sat for quite a long time, so not to just rule out that it might just be natural, and a good clean out will sort it out. But the engine still needed to come apart anyway, because we do have reasonably low compression across all of the cylinders, and we've got very low compression on the number 2, which is the front left. So at the very least that's going to be head gasket, probably at the very worst that's going to be rings. I can't see any cracks anywhere in the blocks, and the valves all look okay. And then of course get lapped back in. So hopefully once we've got it back together, the compression will be nice and even, it will be elevated, and we won't have any leaks, and we won't have any moisture and oil contamination. Next video we'll get to work on the rest of the externals, and then we can start pulling these cases apart. Until then, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and I will see you next time.